So it's not uncommon that someone in your organization might be managing an Excel workbook, something that looks a lot like this, right? So here, this is a typical example of an operating expense summary that someone would be gathering inputs from maybe the expense level detail from a couple different sources, which can be shown here. And then they're aggregating data through the use of a couple other tabs, and then ultimately your data is reflected here in the expense summary. Let's talk about what this looks like for the user, and then we'll talk about what it looks like if they were to use Alteryx for this same managing of the workbook, right? So right now, the individual user is getting these data inputs. EXP1 is coming from maybe one source, EXP2 another source. And you can see there's a post date, a description of the actual expense detail, whether it's a debit or credit. And then what's happening here is there are a couple formulas to be able to push this data through and format it appropriately for the OPEX summary. This yellow column requires manual input, where the individual user would go through each line and assign the expense category. So what you're looking at here is the expense 1 summary level detail. You have your post date, your description, whether it's a debit or credit, and then what's required of the user in the process that it is right now, they would have to manually go through and assign an expense category to each one of these individually. Now for the purposes of this demo, we've only added about 30 lines of dummy data, but what happens if you're going through hundreds of thousands or millions of records, right, from a GL detail? Well, that can take a lot of time. Obviously, it's a very time-consuming exercise, and it's very manual, mundane, and honestly, nobody would want to do that. So, how does this look in Alteryx? In Alteryx, we have the same data sources plugged into a pre-configured workflow here, where EXP1 and EXP2 feed that data, are consolidated here, and then you can see the result, right? So it does that by just hitting run over here in the top right-hand corner. Now, let's go back to the workbook, and let's talk about the real pain point. When the data is refreshed, when you get a refreshed data set, this can be very time consuming, right? So one, not only are you waiting on those inputs for maybe someone else within the business that has to go and extract that out of the system and then provide it to you, but when you finally receive those inputs, you get them in a format of another Excel file just like this, right? Where then you would have to go drag and drop and put that data back into your Excel file like so. Keep your eye over here on the expense category. Watch what happens when I paste this new data. Everything else refreshed, but not the expense category, which is why we're seeing records here that don't actually have an expense category assigned. Another thing is that Excel workbooks aren't dynamic, so you're going to have to drag and drop formulas based on the size that you're getting of data, right? So these are some of the issues and the pain points that we see within an Excel workbook that require manual intervention, a little bit of human oversight, right? Things that are taking time. In Alteryx, watch what happens when I want to replace the data set. I just click remove the data set, EXP1. I grab the new data set directly and drag and drop it onto the canvas like so. So I just select EXP1 new and then connect that to my data stream. And I'll do the same for EXP2, delete. You can pull it straight out of a folder on your desktop. EXP2, new. Once both new data sets are updated and connected to your workflow, you just hit run, and you'll see that now our results go into March. So everything is dynamic here. Not only are those expense categories being automatically assigned, but they are also taking into account things like the date parameters, right? So now we're going into March. It's going to dynamically shift that from a calendar view, right, into March. And then it requires little to no configuration on your part. So what does this mean from a business user? For the business user, it's going to save you tons of time. For this specific example, we had a client that was spending 6 hours. Now, their data set wasn't very large, but 6 hours a week. When you extrapolate that out, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, right, on an individual resource to go do mundane, manual steps that they don't want to do, and your business obviously doesn't need to pay them to do, right, when you can automate it in a software like this. What does it mean for the user? It empowers them to be creative, to be able to replace some of their manual processes with, workflows like this. And then it frees them up to go answer other questions within the organization that they might be able to spend their time rather fixing. What does it mean from an organization? Obviously, it's going to save you time, which is going to save you money. But more importantly than that, Think about the collaborative file work sharing of an Excel workbook. If someone leaves a company and then they are forced to pass that along to, the person replacing them, how much time does it take to get them ramped up on, what's going on, what's actually happening to the data, where are you pulling this data from, how are these formulas working? Well, in Alteryx, everything is documented very neatly. It's highly auditable, very user-friendly, and you're able to see what's happening to your data at every phase in the process, right? So when you build one of these workflows, you're able to share it with other resources within the organization, and then they're able to then start using it immediately and understanding it immediately, which is going to make you way more efficient, right? And not only that, but it's probably going to draw them in and get them very interested in using Alteryx now that they've seen the real power of it.